All right. Hi, I'm Siobhan Sarna, and I have written a book. It's called Healing SIBO. If anybody's trying to figure out what to do next for their small intestine bacterial overgrowth, this is a great place to start. Step by step, recipes, research, definitely. My story, but mainly it's about you. Um, and we then we have courses. Dr. Allison Seebecker co-created the SIBO Recovery Roadmap course with me. If anyone is a pro in this webinar and you're interested in professional training, then definitely go to SIBO SOS and look at that, or her website, siboinfo.com. So that's SIBO land. This is everybody land. This is if you have a mood, if you have a brain. Thank you for being here. Yes, I appreciate it. We're going to be talking with Kara Siedman, who is a registered dietitian. She's also one of the elite trainers at Microbiome Labs. Like, they could have anybody, honestly, if you think about it. And I have Kara, one of a few. But it's like a very small special group. So thank you for being here. She's going to be
Thank you for
talking
having me.
about that gut-brain connection and the newest developments in research in psychobiotics. Like I said a second ago, I wish I had actually named this like mood and strains, which if we ever
Mhm.
do this topic again next year, I'll probably do that. I need to make a mental note of that because the word psychobiotic, I think, is a little bit almost too new. But for those of you who are like super nerds, civilian scientists, welcome, and just glad you all are here. Quickly, I had a bout of food poisoning. I woke up the next morning with no joy. And I thought, oh my goodness, what in the world is happening to me? Because I'm a joyous person, but I really felt a difference. It happened a couple of times. So because I started to notice it. And of course, thank goodness also it came back. My joy came back like within a few days, but I thought, oh, this is a very, very clear example of the gut brain axis and what it can do to your moods. And I thought, oh, what if it was like this all the time? And I know there are people that must live like that, and that struggle is real. And so my heart goes out to anybody who's ever experienced it longer than like a day. And even that was very scary. I'm going to hand things over to you so you can go ahead and get into the presentation. We do have a 15% off coupon for everything at Microbiome Labs, including the stool test and the vaginal microbiome test, which I highly recommend both of those. And it's very rare to have that kind of a discount. So please take advantage of that. Clarissa will put it in there. But the main thing is let's all learn together and get these noggins feeling good. Okay. Thank you, Kara.
Well, thank you so much for having me on it. Let me share my screen. Okay, so everyone can see the slides, correct?
Yes, yes, yes.
Perfect. Thank you. You never know with these computers these days. So I love this topic so much. I mean, I think that you just
Can
hit the nail on the head.
can you go full screen though, my dear?
Oh, am I not full
A
screen?
little
Let's see.
funky. It's a little funky.
Okay, let's stop the
Okay.
share. Somehow I always have issues.
Eh, no big deal.
I know. It's what happens. Okay. Let me share my screen again.
Okay.
How's that look?
Nope, I can see all your fun notes. There you go. You got it. You nailed it.
Okay. We should be in just the screen.
Yes, you're good. You're good.
Okay, good. So this is exactly what we're going to be focusing on today, this gut-brain axis and all the conditions and really honing in on the conditions that are associated with having this dysfunction along the gut-brain axis. So especially things like IBS and even SIBO. And we know that obviously either ourselves, we have friends that have dealt with this, or we see this so much in clinical practice. In fact, it's one of the most common conditions in people under the age of 45. So there's really a huge clinically unmet need and something that hasn't been addressed, in a way that's impactful for people. So that's what we're going to go through today and focusing on these innovative strains for people that are suffering from this gut-brain dysfunction.
Hey, Kara, your audio's a little funky, honey bunny.
My goodness.
I know it's a little in and out. I don't know if anyone else noticed that. If you didn't, then I'm fine. I can certainly.
Okay. You'll let me know if there's any other problems. I have good internet connection. So hopefully it's just,
Might be the placement of your mic. You may have to hold it. Okay, bye.
yeah. I'm striking out here. Okay, so first I want to review something called disorders of gut-brain interaction. And this was previously termed, this is what we would call functional GI disorders. So functional GI disorders encompass dozens of disorders. It occurs in over 40% of adults and children. And in 2016, the term disorders of gut-brain interaction, or DGBI, replaced functional GI disorders. And it was really due to the misconception that the word functional implies lesser legitimacy compared to other disorders. Now, obviously, we know that that's not true, and the term functional was often being associated with either psychiatric or more undefined conditions. So that led to this stigma and a perception of just being less real. And I would have patients all the time come to me and say, oh, they don't know what I have. So they're just saying that I have IBS. And obviously, we know that there's more to the picture. And so disorders of gut-brain interaction, that's really the term now that reflects our current scientific understanding without having that stigmatization. So these disorders are classified by having any combination that's affecting motility or visceral hypersensitivity, mucosal immune dysfunction, altered gut microbiota, so dysbiosis, and of course, having altered central nervous system processing. And it's that altered central nervous system processing that we so often see these mood disorders co-occurring. And there's a statistic, in fact, 76% of people with functional GI disorders, with these disorders of gut-brain interaction, also suffer from depression, anxiety, chronic stress. And so this really highlights the gut-brain axis. We know that the gut and the brain are so intimately connected, and they form essentially two parts of the same system. And we know that the tissues in the gut lining resemble the same tissues in the blood-brain barrier, showing the direct influence of gut activity on brain function. And so the gut-brain axis is there to maintain gut balance. It links our emotional and cognitive areas of the brain with our gut function. And many essential brain substances and hormones and peptides like serotonin and dopamine, GABA, these are all predominantly produced in the gut. And a key component of this is the vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve being our rest and digest regulator. In fact, 90% of signaling through the vagus nerve is from gut to brain. And this is what regulates digestion and hunger signals and regulates inflammation in the gut. And especially those with gut issues, when we have inflammation that's present in the gut, this actually begins to weaken the vagus nerve. And we'll explore that further. So it brings us to this question, is it gut-brain or is it brain-gut? And obviously we know this is bidirectional. So I like to always explain this as having, people either having a bottom to top presentation. So how many of you, if you think about patients or you yourselves or people have ever said that, I've never experienced this level of anxiety or this stress like I have now before my GI issues that set in. And we know that 76% of people with GI issues or irritable bowel syndrome or these functional GI disorders have psychological comorbidities, but there is a top-down presentation. And we see this in people who've had traumatic brain injuries. We often see IBS and SIBO co-occurring, or autism spectrum disorder. 70 to 90% of people have GI comorbidities. So we know that stress influences gut motility, stress influences, gut secretions, and as well as mucin production. So obviously factors related to pathogenesis vary, and we mentioned a few: visceral hypersensitivity and dysbiosis. But the bottom line, and what we're really going to focus on today, is IBS and mood disorders are a result of having this dysfunction along the gut-brain axis. And that's a result of dysbiosis, tryptophan dysregulation, as well as having an altered HPA axis function. So what is this? I love this schematic so much. This was a study that was done in 2022 that was really looking at the small intestines, because most of the research has been primarily focused on investigating immune abnormalities within the colon when it comes to irritable bowel syndrome or these functional GI disorders of gut-brain interaction. So this was a study that was done in 2022 that focused on the immune abnormalities that are actually taking place in the small intestine. And that really needs to be considered as a place of etiology or pathophysiology. And that's because the small intestine is the major site of obviously nutrient antigen exposure, but really where we establish that immune tolerance or immune homeostasis against food and commensal microbes. So just to review really quick, Our large intestine immune system is focused on tolerating large number of commensals, where our small intestine immune system is focused on really discriminating something that's harmful for us, so harmful foods or harmful bacteria from what's safe. And so if we combine these facts with what we know about IBS, so food intolerance being a major driver of IBS, the small intestine is increasingly being explored as that site of pathology. And we also know that IBS patients have greater basal levels of immune activation compared to the healthy cohort. And so we know that this is a huge factor related to the pathogenesis. So just to review, immune tolerance is established. So once something enters into our immune system, our antigen presenting cells, like our macrophages, our dendritic cells, they're the first cells that basically take a sample to determine whether or not something's good or bad. And if something is determined to be fine and okay, well, this releases or upregulates what's known as our regulatory T cells, and that promotes the production of interleukin 10, which is our anti-inflammatory cytokine. So remember that. We're gonna talk about that a lot. Whereas in irritable bowel syndrome, we have altered permeability, we have increased antigen contact, altered microbiota composition, altered mucus layer composition. So once something comes into the small intestines, it activates our T cells, and this produces inflammation, pro-inflammatory cytokines, and that's essentially the driver behind visceral hypersensitivity. So a lot of what creates that distension and bloating. So when we have a dysfunctional gut, this can in turn lead to disruptions along the HPA axis. And so chronic stress disrupts the microbiome, driving dysbiosis. And so are essentially perpetuating this sort of harmful cycle. So it activates our pituitary gland for our adrenals to release cortisol. Cortisol, and especially excessive cortisol production over time, drives leaky gut. And leaky gut, we know, creates an inflammatory response. So we have this dysbiosis, we have bacteria that can be harmful, and essentially we get this production of these inflammatory cytokines. Now, specifically interleukin 6, which is a specific inflammatory cytokine, this activates the HPA axis even further. So if we have this chronic production of pro-inflammatory cytokines, then essentially this chronic activation of our HPA axis will downregulate what's known as our glucocorticoreceptors. And this inhibits that negative feedback loop. So what does that mean? The glucocorticoreceptors are receptors in the gut that help bind cortisol, and it's that binding of cortisol that creates this negative feedback loop. So essentially tells our body to like chill out, you're okay, everything's fine, you can calm down. But if we have this down regulation, then essentially it turns that off and we just stay in this sort of perpetual loop. And so that's why chronic stress is really this sort of maladaptive process. Now, over time, this will lead to a desensitized HPA axis, and that results in what's known as a blunted cortisol awakening response. So when we wake up in the morning, we should get a surge of cortisol, and that's essentially what gets us up and going. But people who suffer from IBS and these disorders of gut-brain interaction, a hallmark feature is this blunted cortisol awakening response. And it's usually associated with the worse cortisol awakening response, the worse the GI issues. So once we have this inflammation and this inflammation is present, whether it's from hypercortisolemia, so increased cortisol production, leaky gut, which drives inflammation, this will dysregulate or affect the path that tryptophan travels. So tryptophan being an essential amino acid that we get from our food. So inflammation activates an enzyme that turns tryptophan or metabolizes tryptophan into what's known as quinolinic acid. And quinolinic acid is neurotoxic. So this is what drives poor sleep and decreased resistance to stress. And this makes tryptophan less available then for its neuroprotective pathway, less available to create serotonin and melatonin. And so interestingly enough, the tryptophan that we intake in our diet, so which is again solely obtained from the diet, 95% of tryptophan is metabolized this pathway. So if we're in a pro-inflammatory state, if we have dysbiosis and we have this HPA axis dysfunction, we have leaky gut, all of this is going to then disrupt the path that tryptophan travels. So how can we circumvent? How can we impact the inflammation that this is having on the gut and the brain? So not only addressing inflammation in the brain, but inflammation in the gut. And this is where we come to our two unique strains, our Bifidolongum 1714 as well as our Bifidolongum 35624. So this is where it's important to know we're talking about Bifidolongum, which is the species. But as we get down to that strain level, this is where it's so important to intricately know these microbes, because even though it comes from the same species, their functions actually change once you get down to that strain level. So Bifidolongum 1714, this is our psychobiotic. So I just love this term, and it's a newer term. And essentially what this means is it's a probiotic that exerts benefits specifically on our mental well-being. So this is just one study. We have over 7 studies on this one strain. So this was just one study that looks at Bifidolongum and its ability to modulate brainwaves during acute stress. So everyone in this study, they were put into a stressful scenario. I think it was like a game of cyberball. And essentially what they found was that the B longum impacted our brainwave activity during that stressful scenario. So during stress, that B longum group, so the 1714 group, there was a significant increase in theta wave activity, which are associated with the release of neurotransmitters.
Kara,
Yes.
I'm having a piece of toast while you're talking, but we do have a request for slowing down talking.
Oh, yes.
Breathe, you're good. It's fine if
the
you go a little bit longer than our 29.5 minutes, no problem.
perfect. It's the Jersey girl in me. Sometimes you just get going. Okay, so during this stressful event, what they found was there was a significant increase in theta wave activity. And theta waves are associated with the release of neurotransmitters. So theta waves will release serotonin and acetylcholine, and these are all linked to more relaxation states. They're linked to creativity, to memory. And then they found an increase in our alpha waves. And these are associated with more calmness. So alpha waves are what's more active when we're in a state of meditation. And so they found an increase in both of these ways during that stressful event. Now, interestingly enough, at rest, the B longum group, so the 1714 group, there was an increase in those theta waves. But more importantly, there was an increase in those beta waves. So beta waves are your high frequency waves. These are what keep us focused. They keep us diligently working. They keep us, entrenched in what we're doing. But when we encounter stress or we're in a stressful situation, we really don't want those beta waves to be expressed. We really want those low frequency waves, like your theta waves and your alpha waves, because this essentially will help you relax into a matter, relax into the situation, and work through a stressful event just in a more relaxed way. So how does this do this? So what specifically is this strain doing? Well, this strain increases our anti-inflammatory cytokine, what's known as interleukin 10. So we mentioned interleukin 10 before. We're going to mention it again in a few more slides. But what the Bifidolongum group does is it has this knockdown effect to decrease inflammation. And what do I mean by that? So when we have inflammation, whether it's inflammation from having an altered HPA axis, we have lots of cortisol because we have this chronic stress, whether it's inflammation because we have leaky gut, whatever inflammation is there, Bifidolongum 1714 comes in and it basically turns off or it shuts down what's known as this NF-kappa B. Basically, all you need to know is NF-kappa B, it's a transcriptase factor. It's on immune cells and immune complexes. This turns on inflammation. It's like a master switch. So let's say I walk into a room and I only want to turn on the light in my kitchen, but I turn on a switch that turns on every light in the house. We don't really need that. We don't want that. It's a waste of energy. So if NF-kappa B gets turned on, then it produces these inflammatory cytokines. Many of these can cross the blood-brain barrier, and that's what promotes inflammation and drives symptoms of anxiety and depression. So 1714 comes in and it actually shuts down that process by increasing interleukin 10. So it establishes a healthier tolerance. And that essentially shuts down or knocks down inflammation. We're blocking that inflammation. So it's not the bacteria, right? The bacteria is not going to our brain. That would not be good necessarily. But it's what the bacteria are doing, and it's the production of this anti-inflammatory cytokine that travels and traverses our vagus nerve and can travel to the brain and cross the blood-brain barrier. So going back to our tryptophan dysregulation, if we take 1714, this psychobiotic, then that interleukin 10 blocks NF-kappa B, that master switch, so we're not turning on inflammation. And if we can shut off inflammation, even though we have inflammation present, right? We have an altered HPA axis, maybe we have, dysbiosis, we have all these things we've been discussing within the gut-brain axis, we can stop the turning on of IDO, which prevents the production of quinolinic acid. And this allows now tryptophan to be available to create serotonin and melatonin. So allows tryptophan to travel this neuroprotective pathway. So let's switch gears and talk about Bifidolongum 35624. So this is a really interesting probiotic. It's for a healthy digestive system. It's been studied for the past 20 years. It's in over 85, probably more than 90 publications at this point, and really focusing on symptoms related to these disorders of gut-brain interaction, symptoms related to IBS. And it's the immunomodulatory benefit. So this improvement in inflammation that makes this strain so powerful. And in fact, the World Gastroenterology Organization has reported this strain, the 35624 strain, had the best evidence base for efficacy in IBS. So it's pretty cool. So this was just a study that we did, most recent. So this was just published in August of 2023, looking at exactly that. What does this strain do specifically in people suffering with symptoms related to IBS? And essentially what this strain found was over the course of 8 weeks, that this strain was associated with significant and clinically meaningful. So what do I mean when I say clinically meaningful? It means someone who maybe suffers from symptoms 5, 6 days a week now goes down to 3 or 2 days a week, which has a huge impact not just on our quality of life, but in turn can obviously impact our joy in life, right? Because as Siobhan said earlier, right, when we don't feel well, obviously, we know it affects our mental state. Now we're seeing what it's doing clinically. So that was really interesting over the course of the 8 week that there was people went from mild or moderate IBS to mild and severe to more moderate. So people found that to be extremely helpful. So how is this doing this? So again, coming back to our immune tolerance and what's taking place in the small intestine. So again, keep in mind, immune tolerance is when something comes in, our antigen presenting cells, right? They boost immune responses. They show that something's potentially beneficial and they release that interleukin 10, right? That anti-inflammatory cytokine. But when things are altered for a multitude of reasons, then we increase those T cells, the T helper cells, and that's what essentially produces inflammation. So that's how we get those symptoms related to visceral hypersensitivity, the distension, the bloating. 35624 also downregulates or prevents the production of those pro-inflammatory cytokines, and it does that by producing interleukin 10. So it's all about that anti-inflammatory cytokine. That's why we say this is an immunomodulatory strain. Both these strains are neuromodulatory. It's because of that ability to shift inflammation. And that essentially prevents hypersensitivity or knocks down that effect of visceral hypersensitivity. So what do we get when we combine these two strains? Well, we get targeted support to the gut-brain axis. So Zenbiome DUAL, to me, this is one of the coolest products. And I like this because it's two strains that are very, very similar, actually. But it's those small differences that change the functionality of those strains, and they're unique. We're going to talk about that unique aspect. But we have a strain that's targeting the GI tract, and then we have a strain, our Psychobiotics 1714, that's targeting inflammation. And what's more important to mention here is that these strains have compatible modes of action. So what do I mean when I say that they're compatible modes of action? So this is data that was presented. Now, this to me was just mind-blowing when I first learned of this data. And this was presented in 2016 at the International Scientific Association for Probiotics and Prebiotics. They're a big group, ISA. And basically what this study was looking at, what the researchers were wanting to understand, was kind of this archaic, or what this thought was as far as probiotics went. Take as much as you can, take as many different strains as you can, and hopefully something works. So what they did was they looked at an arthritis model, and you can see here the clinical progression, and that's this blue line right here. Now, strain A is that 35624 strain, and strain B is another Bifidolongum strain. It's like DPC something, I forget. But you can see each strain individually shows clinical improvement in it, and it actually shows improvement over the natural course. So this graph over here looks at what happens when those strains are combined. And that's the purple line here. Hopefully you guys can see my mouse. To me, this is mind blowing because what are we seeing? That those strains that were effective individually, when combined, completely negate. So they completely knock out those benefits to making them both ineffective. And so they had competing effects. So it's important that we start to challenge companies, we start to question our probiotics, especially when it comes to the research, because we don't want to take strains that are combined that are potentially knocking each other out. So this to me just really changed a lot of my thinking of when I am prescribing or when I am taking probiotics. And it just, demonstrates some of the problems that we can see with some of these multi-strain probiotics. So Zenbiome DUAL was clinically mapped. It was whole genome mapped to show that compatibility. And this is just one of the studies that we did that looked at that, the combination of the two over an 8-week period in people suffering from irritable bowel syndrome. And we measured everything from irritable bowel symptoms, depression, anxiety, also looked at cortisol output because of that blunted cortisol awakening response that we know is a hallmark feature in irritable bowel syndrome. We know that that indicates an impaired stress response, but we also looked at inflammatory biomarkers. And essentially what they found was over the course of the 8 weeks, there was clinical improvement in symptoms. 82% of patients, in fact, had clinically significant improvement. But I want to just make note that symptoms started to gradually come back when the supplement was stopped. And this just really brings us to the understanding of the difference in the types of probiotics that we take. The scientists who discovered this strain, our bifido and lacto strains, they call them tourists because they're not colonizing, they're not changing the microbial landscape. If you're familiar with megaspore, that's one of the unique benefits about our spores, is that they actually can change the microbial ecology. These next-gen probiotics, our bifido strains, our lactobacillus strains, these are having very specific effects on targeting very specific components, in this case, targeting symptoms related to the gut and symptoms related to neuroinflammation. We saw improvement in depression and anxiety, sleep quality improved. And then we also saw that cortisol awakening response. So here you can see there's that blunted cortisol awakening response. So we're not getting that surge when people wake up. And then you can see that once the probiotic was started, that we started to get improvement in that. And then following the course of dual strain probiotic, we had restoration of that cortisol awakening response, which is important because we saw the GI issues improve as well. So we know they're closely related. This was just one other study. This was a real world evidence study. So real world evidence is a sort of new wave of research. We love this because it's just people in the real world taking the probiotics without changing much else. So we are really just kind of seeing people in their normal day-to-day life. And these were 55 adults with IBS. And I just want to make note, 85%, 100% had GI issues and 85% had psychological comorbidities. And they were given the dual strain probiotic. And again, similar outcome measures as far as looking at IBS symptom severity, so abdominal pain and bowel habits, but also looking at stress and fatigue and overall impact to daily life. And what they found was over the course of the 4 weeks that there was significant improvement in pretty much every clinical outcome from stress, fatigue. You see here that mood goes up because they're measuring good mood. So the increase is obviously positive. So we're almost done, and I always like to kind of focus on what makes these strains so unique. So what is the magic about these strains? Because they are two very unique strains. And what's so unique about them is they contain what's known as this exopolysaccharide layer. And it's this EPS layer, we call this Harry Potter's invisible cloak, and I'll explain why. But it's this layer that really separates these bifidolongum strains from other bifidolongum strains or other bifidobacteria strains in general. So the magic of the exopolysaccharide coating, so the EPS layer has immunoregulatory effects. So it also, and you can see this here, the EPS layer here versus a non-EPS, and you can see that EPS can produce interleukin 10. Interleukin 10 being our anti-inflammatory cytokine. So that EPS layer, you'll see the bifidolongum strain over here. It's this sticky outer coating versus other non-EPS strains. So it's literally like a kind of sticky coating. And it's that production of interleukin 10 that provides extra immunoregulatory effects. And that's what really helps to knock down that inflammation. And it's because of that EPS layer that it brings us to this unique question is, what does it mean when we say a probiotic is silent? This was a study that we did that looked at the Bifidobacterium 35624 strain and compared it to a non-EPS strain. So just another Bifido strain. It was a Bifidolactis strain. So a strain that's really common in yogurts. And so they wanted to compare the effects of what this Bifidobacterium 35624 strain and that EPS layer has on inflammation. And essentially what they found was that the strain that was in the yogurt had a much more stimulatory response, had a greater stimulatory response than Bifidobacterium 35624. You could see here, this is interleukin 10. They both produce that. But you can see the yogurt strain also produced other inflammatory cytokines. So what this is saying, to kind of put it simply, is other probiotics, especially ones that don't have this level of EPS, can have a mixed tone, meaning you can turn on everything. So once something gets presented into the immune system, everything gets turned on, inflammation and anti-inflammation, and hopefully the anti-inflammatory components outweigh the inflammatory aspect. Whereas just the Bifidobacterium 35624 has just an anti-inflammatory tone only, meaning it's only producing interleukin 10, which allows it to sort of go incognito. So once it gets presented into the immune system, that EPS layer is like Harry Potter's invisible cloak, so it can't be seen. So it only turns on those Treg cells to turn on or induce that interleukin 10. So Bifidobacterium lactis produced anti-inflammatory cytokine, but it also upregulates pro-inflammation. And this is problematic in someone who's already inflamed, someone who already has a lot of inflammation. You can turn on inflammation, which can potentially worsen inflammation, not just in the gut, but beyond. And this may be why some people who take probiotics feel worse potentially, because if they're already in an inflamed state. So this EPS really alerted the researchers to say, hey, this is unique because it's not having the same effect that we can obviously see in other probiotics. So it can go incognito. It's Harry Potter's invisible cloak. And that's what makes this probiotic, but also these two strains so unique. And so Zenbiome DUAL is the combination of these two strains at 2 capsules per day. We do want to take it with a meal. And I always tell people, because of that study that was done on strain combinations, unless the two strains have been studied together, I always encourage people to take your probiotics separate. Don't take them all at the same time. Because what if they compete and they essentially knock out the benefits that each one of them is having? And so when it comes to IBS, when it comes to these functional GI disorders or disorders of gut-brain interaction, a lot of the treatments out there, a lot of the management is just around symptom control. And a lot of them, aren't as successful, especially when you get into the pharmacological world for IBS. And so this just really offers a unique and innovative adjunct or part of part of your protocols or part of your treatment that you do for these patients in not only helping to alleviate symptoms, but really getting down to the inflammation and focusing on obviously those immune and neurotransmitter modulation and the effects that it has in reducing that inflammation. So thank you. Hopefully you got some little nuggets there.
That was a lot. It was
It's
a lot. I mean, it's great. It's great.
It's so unique. Yeah, they're really unique. Yeah.
To get your brain around. We do have some questions, and then Clarissa's going to put the link in if anyone wants to try it or anything else, including Megaspore, which I know you referred to, and the stool test, the vaginal microbiome test, everything at Microbiome Labs is 15% off. Clarissa just put it in the chat for you. So let me get to some questions for you. Can you describe one more time? Hold on, I just lost it. Where are they? Yep. The Harry Potter slide, the EPS.
Yes.
Just one more time, say what that is again.
Yep. So exopolysaccharide layer. So that EPS layer is essentially this sticky outer coating. It's this outer layer that's on this bacteria particularly. And it's that EPS layer that, again, that's what we think of as almost like Harry Potter's invisible cloak, that allows these strains to sort of go silent through the immune system to only turn on our anti-inflammatory cytokine. So it's unique in that it allows these strains to just have anti-inflammatory benefits, but the EPS layer itself also has anti-inflammatory components. You're almost getting a double whammy with these strains.
Okay, speaking of which, would taking other probiotics be contraindicated?
It's not contraindicated, but I wouldn't take other probiotics at the same time.
At the exact same time.
And
Okay.
and I just always say this is why I think we need to challenge just research around strains and strain specificity and what those strains are doing. So that's why I always say like Bifidobacterium 35624, 1714, they come from the same family, they sound like they're related, and they are, but they're two very different people. They have two very different personalities.
My sister and I are very different. I'll just say that. She's great, but different. Um, okay, let's see. Can you repeat what you said about downregulation of the glucocorticoid?
Cortico. Yep.
Say it again.
Yeah. Glucocorticoreceptors.
That's the one. Thank you.
Yeah. So when we have this HPA axis dysfunction, right, which we know is very, very common in the gut brain world, right? So dysbiosis, leaky gut, we get this production of interleukin 10. Interleukin 10 is one of our inflammatory cytokines, and interleukin 6, all these numbers. So that production of inflammation activates the HPA axis even further. And it's that constant activation that it sort of perpetuates this cycle that we get this downregulation of our glucocorticoreceptors, which essentially, if you're not binding cortisol, then you're not getting that negative feedback loop. You're not getting that feedback that says, hey, chill out, everything's okay. And it's that downregulation of these receptors, through this inflammation and specifically through this interleukin 6 that you don't get that negative feedback loop. So you're essentially in this vicious cycle.
How long to wait to take another probiotic after taking dual?
That's a good question. This is, sort of preliminary speculation from our researchers. As we always say, about 4 hours. And it actually has to do, if you remember that picture of the small intestine where I had those dendritic cells or the antigen presenting cells, that it can take sort of, 5 hours. So we usually say at least 4 to 5 hours apart is good, just to give time for things to be presented into the body and then for the body to figure out, hey, this is something good, or to not negate any of the effects of those. So I say about 4 or 5 hours.
Okay, and how to take dual with an antibiotic?
At least 2 hours apart from an antibiotic. Yep.
Okay. Is
Yep.
Megaspore okay to take with Zenbiome DUAL?
So again, I think they
Just
work
space.
as long as it's spaced out. I think they're extremely complementary. For me, I always say Megaspore is kind of a foundation, in that it's actually changing the microbial landscape. It's actually supporting the growth of your beneficial bacteria. Where dual, we're using this to achieve specific effects in reducing the GI symptoms and reducing anxiety and depression.
And sorry, my cat is just like so distracting. Could this help in tamping down a COVID cytokine storm?
Oh, for sure. If you ever do any biomeffects consults with me or ever talk to me, I think anyone that has inflammation sort of benefits from this strain, even if you're not suffering from gut brain dysfunction. And in fact, they did do some studies on the 35624 in other disease states like ulcerative colitis and psoriasis, and they showed a decrease in those pro-inflammatory. So I think there's just an anti-inflammatory tone to this program.
All right. So would this reduce abdominal pain since it would lower hypersensitivity?
Absolutely. And that's one of the outcomes that we
Sure.
measure in all of the studies. Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm gonna ask everyone to please put your questions in the Q&A box. So I know some of you are new. It's great to have you here. I just bring it on home over to the Q&A box, because if I start to monitor the chat, I get distracted, and I just want to keep it here in the Q&A box. Thank you. Thanks, Clarissa. So some people who wake up slowly may need a cortisol boost in the morning. That's a question.
So usually when we wake up, we do get this increase in cortisol because that's essentially what gets us up and going.
Yeah.
I mean, I know for me, I'm like, I don't want to press snooze, so I need that cortisol boost. But what happens with people who have this blunted cortisol awakening response, which is a hallmark feature in these disorders of gut-brain interaction, they're not getting. So it makes them have more fatigue, or why symptoms, often start shortly after waking up, it's because they're not getting that they have that blunted cortisol awakening response.
Um, hey, Roxana, would this help individuals with shrinkage of the pituitary gland? Oh my,
I don't
sorry.
know. Yeah, I don't know. Would be interesting, but it wouldn't be contraindicated.
Okay.
Yeah.
How does it differ from BB536?
So I would have to look up some of this very specific research on
Okay.
BB5, but this is, again, it just goes back to really intricately understanding the modes of action of all these different probiotics, which is why even if we look at different Lactobacillus acidophilus, strains, they don't all function the same way. So I would look up that strain and kind of see what research has been done on it. But I can't say for sure because it's not one of our strains. I haven't delved into the research.
It says, please remind me of the pro-inflammatory cytokines and the non-inflammatory.
So
I don't,
interleukin
okay.
10 is our anti-inflammatory cytokine. And then other pro-inflammatory cytokines that you'll read about, interleukin 6 and TNF alpha, interleukin 1 beta. I mean, there's a lot. Interleukin 8, these are all more pro-inflammatory.
Catherine saying, how would you answer a patient's question? I want to start taking a probiotic because I hear they are good for you. And which should I take even though I don't feel bad? Oh, I have such a comment on that. Go ahead.
Well, so do I. And
I'm sure you do.
of course I'm biased because, and I'll say this even before I started working for Microbiome Labs, I've worked in the GI space. I've been a practitioner forever. And what got me to Microbiome Labs was Megaspore. And the reason for that is because of the research that has been conducted on it in showing how Megaspore really supports the entirety of the microbial landscape, that it's like giving your garden a more nutrient dense soil versus adding in those specific nutrients one at a time. And so that's why I say we almost have two separate paths. We have what's actually shifting the microbial landscape, supporting diversity, which is one of the key characteristics of having a healthy microbiome, versus if I have someone who is really suffering from sleep and abdominal pain, then yes, I might start them on dual because I want them to feel better, but you're still not necessarily getting down to the root of what's driving some of the dysfunction within the gut.
Okay, I want to, you guys are having a side conversation in the chat, and I wish you would just put your questions in the Q&A box. Here's why, because I'm going to go with what Dr. Siebecker says about the probiotics, because there is a question about this also in the Q&A. So what she says is Dr. Siebecker is a world-renowned SIBO expert and specialist and is very involved in this whole world. And what she says is that there are studies that show that probiotics help with IBS and SIBO, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And then clinically, sometimes that doesn't line up. And we can say that about everything, right? What she does say is to do the probiotics prior to getting a negative SIBO breath test, meaning, oh my gosh, you've done the treatment, you're doing your probiotic at the same time. That's all cool. It's working really well. Cool. Keep doing what you were doing, right? Don't do this. I'm doing a treatment. I've not started my probiotic yet. I get a negative SIBO breath test, and then I start my probiotic. What she's saying is do it beforehand. And then after you get a negative SIBO breath test, just go ahead and continue with your probiotic, but don't do it as a new thing after. I hope that makes sense. That is her suggestion. So it really is something for you to try. This has a lot. I love that it's got all of the IBS benefits
Yeah,
and it's got the brain benefits, and you have an opportunity to try it. I think it could be an answer for a lot of people. I know that it's been an answer for me and my family, and so it's an opportunity. There you go. That's what I have to say. Can it help?
absolutely.
Is it right? So can it help people with IC, interstitial cystitis?
So interstitial cystitis is an autoimmune condition. And as much as, I can't make a claim that, this is going to help all
Right.
autoimmune conditions, I just think having something that reduces inflammation. We also see IBS co-occurring with IC all the time. So
Yes.
I think to help manage some of the symptoms, I think this, is obviously a great complement to whatever, preventions.
And I want to just also say, hold on, micro. Do you know this other lab? The Microgen X, I think what it is they specialize. Look up UTI free, live UTI free. And it's a whole, like what I am to SIBO and my nerdiness and getting information out, they have a whole thing about IC and UTIs. And they also work with a lab that cultures for so much more than your typical urologist does. I had a friend who had a UTI for a year, several rounds of antibiotics. Bless this urologist's heart. They had in the office a brochure for this. I think it's called Microgen DX or something like that. And I had already known about it, but couldn't remember the name. Still not doing a great job remembering the name, but something like that. Anyway, we sent the P off, and she got the proper culture. She got the proper antibiotic. Bob's your uncle, done. So anybody who has that, look for live UTI free. Okay. I will look up live. Okay, good. And yes, 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 yes. Do they need to be refrigerated? Yes, they're in pill form.
Oh, actually, no, they don't need to be refrigerated, but just because we've done the survivability studies and
Okay.
they're safe at room temperature. Yep.
Please do go to the microbiome microbiome lab's website, so you can investigate the stool test, the microbiome vaginal test. And I've tried to take Megaspore as the instructions say, and I get the runs. Will this new dual probiotic probably do the same? Kim, everybody's got a snowflake of your very own microbiome. Also, did you titrate up on the Megaspore just a little bit? Go ahead for that.
Yeah, I always say we often hear that, and I've obviously seen that in clinical practice too. Megaspore, because it's truly coming in and modulating the microbiome, it's really shifting things around. We can get that die off and that Herx reaction. And as bacteria die off, it can create more bloating and it can create more discomfort. It can create diarrhea. But no, I haven't really seen it in my patients. I haven't really noticed any negative effects. But anytime you're doing any type of modification, there can sometimes be obviously changes, but for the most part, I have not heard of any negative changes and only improvement.
Okay. Let's see here. Okay, I'm gonna just get rid of some of these other comments, guys, just because it's making me a little bit nervous of a couple of things. Okay. Since they are bacterial strains, how does it not alter the microbial environment? I'm just wondering, is there any possibility of it worsening bacterial overgrowth? One thing I just want to say is this. When we've talked to Dr. Mark Pimentel about this, I specifically asked him a lot of these questions. And one of the best things I've heard like in years was the following response. Once you reduce the bacterial overgrowth with a treatment, whether it's the antibiotics, the herbals, or the elemental diet, the microbiome comes back into harmony to a certain extent. So what was so cool about that is that these bad players that are overgrowing, because they're still present in a healthy microbiome, but when these particular organisms overgrow, small intestine bacterial overgrow, when they get under control, the rest of the microbiome is allowed to re-flourish and repopulate. So I understand where you're thinking. I understand where you're coming from. I would not overthink this. I would try it. I would get my SIBO treatment going and then take it from there. That's my advice to you from being around all of this for so long. Should it be taken long term? I'm going to just say this, maybe you can add to it, of course. Our ancestors went out to the ground every day and got their potatoes and their carrots and their veggies. So they were re-inoculating themselves every day with their spores and probiotics. We typically don't do that. So do I need to do it long term? I'm going to. What are your thoughts? How do you answer that?
So, that's always one of the big questions we get because no one wants to take anything forever. And that's why we have to understand the difference between getting down to the root of what's driving your condition like SIBO or IBS and patching up the holes in the foundation versus something that you're taking to achieve a very specific effect. These are strains that are really targeting your symptoms. So what we found in the studies were when you stopped the dual strain probiotic, when you stopped the 1714 and or the 3564, symptoms return because they're not getting down to what's driving the dysfunction in the first place. And that's where we have to look at root cause medicine. And then we have to look at next gen probiotics as part of the management. But so, yeah, technically, I would say if someone, has a lot of inflammation, this is a good one and very safe to take long term. Yep.
Catherine, we're doing a webinar next week with Karen Krishnan. Hold on, the 16th at 3. That's a week from today. And he's going to be talking about his SIV, which is his topical acne serum based on probiotics. It's very cool. The results are amazing. So Catherine, be sure to look for your email for that, because you were asking what's a good strain for acne. I'm going to send you there. If your SIBO treatment has been resistant for over 3 years, could it worsen the overgrowth? This is, I think you're asking, I understand why you're asking that question. I think there's a bigger picture at play here.
Always.
So what is your underlying cause? Are you, what are the treatments that you have tried? Are you on a prokinetic? Did you do the SIBO breath test with lactulose versus glucose? Was it 3 hours? So come to SIBOSOS.com and check out some of the freebies there, because that can guide you through that. It says anonymous attendee, so I can't tell who you are if you're a first name or name I recognize from the community. But go to SIBOSOS.com. There's lots of free things there for you. Okay, after many x-rays, shall we use probiotics and iodine?
Probiotics and iodine?
Iodine. I don't know, Flores, where this is coming from. I know you've asked this in a couple of ways, so I know this is really in your heart and on your mind, and I want to answer that, but I
So
don't know what the answer.
I just would say defer back to your provider in regards to iodine, because not everyone's a good candidate to take that. But I always, again, anytime we have heavy metals, anytime we have environmental exposures, this is something else that can drive dysbiosis. And if you already have dysbiosis, it can potentially worsen it. So I think always looking at the gut and always using the microbiome and focusing on the microbiome as part of your foundation is going to be helpful, especially when trying to emphasize liver health.
I'm so sorry, I have my little finger up because I forgot to do something really important.
Oh, yeah.
It's 3:52. I'm sorry. I usually do this like 20 minutes ago. Sorry. I have a realtor calling me. I have 2 Instacart orders going out to people that I care for. So I got a lot going on today. Sorry about that. I wanted to let you know that if you decide to buy the Zenbiome DUAL, I'm really, okay, we'll do anything for Microbiome Labs within the next hour. So let's call it 4 o'clock Eastern time almost, so 5 o'clock Eastern time. We will be sending you a session that we did with Kiran Krishnan, who's the co-founder of Microbiome Labs, and I will show it to you very quickly. Let's see, you would have to send your proof of purchase to info@SIBO SOS.com, right, Clarissa? Help me out there. All right, this is you. Oh, here we go. Zoom, share screen, just real quick. Boom. So it's probiotics from a microbiologist standpoint with Karen Krishnan. And one of my team members like, are we sending part 1 or part 2? I'm like, you got to send both. You can't just send part 1. So it's a 2-parter, and it's a wonderful, wonderful conversation had with Karen. Refrigeration, about probiotics, myths in the industry. So if you wanted to receive that for free, usually we charge for that, then go ahead and after you place your purchase within the next hour at Microbiome Labs, send us your proof of purchase to info@sibosos.com, and then we'll send you the link. Woo, there you go. Yes, we're going to send out the presentation today in the replay email that'll come out in a little bit. Patrice has been asking, are you familiar with Presidium Biotics with lactose and longum to shield EMF impacts? Have you heard of this? And it's okay if you haven't.
No, I have not. I would say I'll have to look into it.
So I actually did a webinar with the gentleman that
Oh.
created it. It's very, very interesting, Patrice.
Interesting.
I after listening to him for an hour, I'm a believer. It was really fascinating. So there you
I
go.
think just more to come as we're finding
Yes.
more strains that
Yeah.
have these unique properties, and that's the next gen world. That's why we call it next gen.
Exactly. Lisa, you're getting ready to start Xifaxan. When can I incorporate Zenbiome after the Xifaxan treatment? I would actually do it before or during. That's what Dr. Seebecker was saying. Like,
Yep.
you don't want to do it after.
Yep, I would do it during as well.
Okay, right. Okay, how long does it take to see improvements? Karen's asking. So I asked you before we started.
Yep. So in the studies, we see improvements by 4 weeks, generally speaking, and that's and then some of the pretty significant improvements at 4 weeks, and then further improvements by that 8-week time period.
Okay, all right, and everybody's different. That's the whole point, right?
I mean, I've had some people that told me they felt better within a week of starting it. So everyone is very different.
Okay. All right. I'm a patient. History of digestive discomfort, methane SIBO 2021, chronic stress, bloating, and discomfort. Need a holistic practitioner who can help resolve oh, don't be overwhelmed, but I understand, Linda, why you might be. Clarissa, can you reach out to Linda with the list and with some resources there? Okay. Catherine, what is good? I did that one. Anne, I'm so glad you're here. Man, I'm excited for you about that UTI business there. Okay. For clarity, dual Zen or Zenbiome Duo plus Megaspore Biotic or just Duo. So go ahead.
Yeah, I like both. I mean, again, Megaspore has a different mechanism of action. We know we've done studies on increasing microbial diversity, which is such an important aspect to having a healthy microbiome. Whereas Zenbiome Dual, I would target for obviously anyone suffering from any disorder of gut-brain dysfunction and IBS and SIBO and mood disorders, anyone who obviously has a lot of inflammation, and just be sure to take it, separate.
Okay. Bonnie, I want to make sure you've got the right links because the coupon number doesn't work. It's not a number. It's no bloat 15, and you have to kind of go register for account, which is like name and email, basic. Then you'll have a patient direct code, which might be auto-populated, and then coupon code no bloat 15. Okay, Eileen, if you're in Phoenix, you're looking for a functional gastro, I would go to Mona Morstein. She, I think, is in Phoenix. Mona Morstein, wonderful. Tell her we said hi. And then there's Clarissa just put it in the chat. Okay. We're almost done. If someone has an existing sensitivity to tryptophan and cannot eat tryptophan producing foods without getting ill, like I guess turkey, does this probiotic help with balancing tryptophan? My son has become ill on 5-HTP in the past and has been recommended that he not be given SSRIs. I've been trying to find how to regulate naturally produced tryptophan in his body, as possibly affecting his mood and behavior.
Absolutely. And too much for this conversation here, but I think there's a lot of people who don't react well to things like 5-HTP or L-glutamine, and a lot of it does reflect back on this tryptophan dysregulation. And so essentially, if there's inflammation, any tryptophan that's being ingested, right, because we know it's an essential amino acid, this strain, the 1714 strain, is going to help to make sure that the tryptophan that's coming in is being shuttled down its neuroprotective pathway to be able to produce endogenous serotonin and melatonin. So it's not like taking the end product, it's taking the strain that's going to hopefully encourage a better product production of serotonin.
All right, Bonnie, can you reach out to Clarissa, and she's in the SIBO SOS support. Bonnie's having a hard time ordering. She's saying that it said expired. Has anyone else had a problem ordering? Usually I hear about it by now. So thank you, Bonnie, for letting us know. It said expired. Kara, can you just confirm with y'all's customer service to make sure we're okay?
You got it.
Please, thank you. All right, thank you all so much. Kara, great job as always.
Thank you for having me. I love this topic so much. So it was fun to
Really?
go
I couldn't tell.
I just say I'm such a nerd when it comes to the science of it. It's so unique. So hopefully you guys got some little nuggets.
I mean, this really is cutting edge. This is like we're talking about next gen. This is that next gen, and it's right here for you. So definitely email us at info@SIBOSOS with your proof of purchase within the next hour. Okay, so really seriously within the next hour. This is a webinar only bonus. Thank you for that, and then we'll get you the Kiran Krishnan presentation as a in webinar purchase bonus, even though I'm spending an extra hour with y'all because I forgot to say that. And thank you very much. And we'll see you next time.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. All right. Thank you very much, Clarissa. Appreciate you. And Floris, so I would definitely try this, but I would definitely also look at a treatment for your methane and hydrogen SIBO. We do have SIBO recovery roadmap course that takes you through all of this every step of the way. Also, my book talks about it. So that's $20. The course is like $297, I think. We also have small group coaching with Dr. Allison Seebecker, which is a premium pricing. But I just wanted to give you the 3 choices. So you can really get a lot out of the book. You can also join the SIBO SOS community Facebook group where that's free. And there's tons, like 30,000 people in there talking about SIBO every single day. Thank you all so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you as always. And just in terms of upcoming, on a week from today, so that would be April 16th, 2023. We do have Kiran Krishnan coming back to talk about SIV, his new skincare serum that is a spore-based probiotic acne and skincare anti-aging serum. He sent me some. I have a small psoriasis patch on my leg, and it changed it. So that is huge. I mean, most topical things you put on psoriasis doesn't change it. The before and afters of this product for acne are phenomenal. They're doing other studies for enlarged pores and all of that. It's wrinkles. I mean, it's wild and so exciting. And it's not just like taking Megaspore and putting it in a serum and slathering on. There's a special formulation to it. And it's actually not that expensive. It's like super crazy good. And we have a discount for you that day. So that is next Tuesday. What else am I doing? This Thursday, I'm doing a presentation with Sinclair Keneally on parasites. Good time had by all. If you want information about that and you haven't received the invite yet, you can email us at info@sibosos.com, and we'll definitely be emailing about that on tomorrow. Okay. Mwah! Thanks, everybody. All right. Thank you. Hugs to Petunia. She sends her best. Thanks, Clarissa. All right. Talk to y'all next time. Bye. Thank you. I'm excited for you.